Hi, it's us know-it-alls again. This is episode 20 of our continuing show in which we show you quilts that we have questions about and also show them to our know-it-all friends and see what they have to say. So this one we're just calling a serendipity because it's kind of a grab bag of things we've been interested in for the past couple of weeks. So we're going to start with Debby Cooney, and she is what we call an independent researcher, which means she gets to do whatever she wants. And she likes to write about quilts in southeastern Pennsylvania and Maryland around her home. And she's going to talk about a sampler here, and it'll be fun. So can we see that? I think we can.
Let's make sure here, just a second.
Interesting how this ties into mine. Wow.
Oh, well, good.
Well, this is incredible.
Okay, well, I attempted to purchase this quilt, which came up for auction very recently in southern York County, Pennsylvania, at a small local auction. So it didn't get a lot of publicity, and I was hopeful that I would be successful, and of course I wasn't. But it was so interesting that I had to just keep researching it. It is, as you can see, predominantly red and green with a little bit of yellow here and there. It was in the McFatridge family of southern York County, and it is very bold designs, mostly with a sort of very dark green, yellow, and very little else but the red, green, and yellow. And the family history, which you can see in that little, on the left here, that little note pinned to one of the center blocks, is that it was made by the McFatridge sisters, Mary Amanda McFatridge and Grisella Jane, when they were about 14, which would have put Amanda about at 14 years old in 1882, and her sister 2 years younger. The dealer who was with me to look at this quilt insisted that 14-year-old girls certainly could have done something this elaborate, that they had 14 years old, trained very well by their mother or whoever, had fabulous skills, which one sees in samplers and of course quilts. So that was the story, but I had to go a little deeper into that than that. Here's the stamp of the wreath block, Grisella Leib, L-E-I-B. It's a little vague there. Very interesting a wreath with ruching, very, very attractive. Grisella was their mother, was the mother of the two McFatridge sisters.
What a name.
Yes. She was the granddaughter of Christian Leib, who is, this is his homestead, this is his manor, manor house as they called it. And let me get it out here. This comes from Find a Grave, and here's what it says about it. It was built in 1798 in a fieldstone structure. It was the manor house of Christian Leib, an affluent farmer and stiller. I presume that means distiller. Leib went on to become Hopewell Township's largest landowner, amassing over 1,500 acres of land before his death in 1847. Hopewell Township surrounds Stewartstown, where I found this. So Grisella in 1860 was listed by herself in the census as a seamstress with a personal estate of $1,000. Now, I found that very interesting in that she's living by herself while it's next door to her brother Christian and their mother is living with them. She still was listed by herself and has this personal estate with her name. And so I looked up her father's will. He didn't have one. He died intestate, but the money seems to have been split 2/3 to the children, she and her brother Christian, and 1/3 to her mother. So that was the old way of doing it. She married in 1864 to this man on the left here, Michael McFatrick, who was an Irish immigrant and had signed up as in 3 times in Civil War regiments, and at this point was a captain in the 166th Pennsylvania Infantry. In the census, though, he is listed as a laborer, a farm laborer, and the money, the personal estate now of $3,000 and real estate of $5,000 are listed in her name. So the laws in Pennsylvania must have changed from the old ways, because I don't think in prior decades it would have been listed to her name. Everything would have gone to the husband, of course. So interestingly enough, in 1865, Grisella had a son, not with Michael, who was still off to war, but the marriage, he took the name McFatridge, and he's named after Grisella's father. So you'd have to say this is an independent woman. So of course I had to look at other York County album quilts to see what they were like, and the York County Documentation Project registered quite a few of them. The most interesting I found was Sarah Jane Ebaugh's 1854 quilt, which looks quite a bit like Grisella's. And in fact, in 1850, Grisella and Sarah lived 6 census pages apart in this little town of Stewartstown. So they didn't live very far away. And in fact, there's quite some overlap here. We've got both of these, including the ladies in Bryansville, have the swag and tassel border of Grisella's quilts, wreaths, and 4 cross elements in a lot of her blocks. So very somewhat similar. Over here we see a little darker fabric, which Grisella's also has, a very dark green, not quite this teal, but definitely darker green. And it also has flowers coming out of a vase like this, and a basket. So we've got some similarities there. 2 more very early York County albums, and this one, even though it's larger, this one really resembles Grisella's, with the wreaths, these 4 crossed elements all over, sort of oak leaf and reel designs. And this other one also very similar, and interestingly enough has a Maryland stair-step border, but then this is a part of a regional style. This one is also quite interesting in that it was made in Stewartstown as a reproduction, but the family goes all the way back in Stewartstown, so I'm sure that this is a copy of an earlier quilt that had probably been used up and damaged. But it also bears, in the center at least, a strong resemblance to Grisella's quilt. And here's one Julie sold some years ago that shows the very bold quality that a lot of these York County quilts have, and it has this eagle that one sees on the quilts of the Miami Valley in Ohio. So it shows regional influences spreading. And York County is 50 miles north, York City even is 50 miles north of Baltimore. Stewartstown is only about 40 miles north, and here we have an album from York County with Mary Simon's Baltimore album basket, right in an interesting place. And while the flowers aren't exactly the same, these have more layering than this one, but somewhat the same configuration. And this one also has the swag and tassel border. Here's a quick and dirty map Stewartstown here, Baltimore here, Carroll County, what I'm going to talk about a little bit later here. This is Harford County. And up here, we also have Lancaster County, and just below Baltimore, Anne Arundel County. Sort of generic southeastern Pennsylvania albums. This one from Trish Herr's collection has this darker fabric and more delicate somewhat in the middle, and pots of flowers on the edges. This one more the 16 block that a lot of York County albums take, but all very similar otherwise. This one was in one of the Jeanette Luzansky books, and if it hadn't been for its being labeled like this, and I had seen it without any other identification, I would have thought this was Baltimore. But it's not, it's Lancaster County, and here is an almost duplicate of it, fortunately in color here, but it has the Jackson's wreath, Jackson's heart wreath that shows up very clear a lot in Baltimore. What else have we got? Oh, these sort of fabulous leaves. Oh, the lyre shows up quite a bit. The overlap here between Lancaster County and Baltimore and York County is quite striking. But down to Baltimore. Okay, their quilts from 1845 on, the very best of them are just way more elaborate than what you see in York County or Lancaster. These are the Mary Simon style, very heavily overlaid applique and massed flowers and fruits. Of course, the eagle and liberty cap. This is one of the earliest of the very heavily and fancy blocks of Baltimore. This is more typical. It's not as fancy, but it is quite interesting and nice. It's got the very same lyre block, pots of flowers, wreaths, in the Maryland stair-step border, while this one has swag border. Baltimore County, if Jennifer Goldsboro will say, is when you get away from Baltimore City, the albums tend to be somewhat similar, but simpler. And while this one is somewhat fancy and very different from most of the layouts in Baltimore City, this one is more typical. It's got some Baltimore looking elements, but they're just simpler. But again, 4 elements here, big leaves, something similar to Grisella's right here. Carroll County is where I think there's a real overlap between York and York County quilts. This one is one of the fancier Carroll County quilts I've ever seen. 5 blocks, which is more typical of the 25 blocks in Baltimore, and quite elaborate for anywhere outside Baltimore City. This one is more like it, 16 blocks, but some Baltimore blocks here. I think this is probably a Mary Simon, just migrating a few miles over the border between Carroll and Baltimore, just to the west. And 2 more Carroll County albums. This one has Germanic birds right here and up in here, and hex symbols and birds all quilted in here. So this one's really got the Germanic influence. And this one is nice because it's delicate in the center and heavier on the outside, and has the more Baltimore-ish grape wreath. Just south of Baltimore, you have Anne Arundel County. This one looks very much like a Baltimore quilt, really not too much different. And this one, Prince George's County, is southeast of Washington, but the Baltimore style migrated all the way down there with these 36 blocks of, fairly elaborate blocks for being non-Baltimore City. So the question is, did Grisella do this, or, as the family thinks, was it done by the daughters in the 1880s? Well, I, of course, think that this is probably from the 1850s or 60s, and not least because Grisella Lieb's stamp is right here, and it's her maiden name. She didn't marry until 1864. I think it's kind of hard to tell whether this is 1850s or 60s, but I go with the 50s actually. So here's her stamp, and these, you just don't see them that often after about 1860, in the 1860s. After the Civil War, this fad for these kind of quilts with stamps seems to have waned quite a bit. The red, green, and yellow just quilts in album style just weren't that popular. There were new fabrics, bolder fabrics. And so I really don't think that they, that was the daughters, although this quilt was also in the sale, and you can see it has the same double rod quilting as the album. It's kind of a newer style. So I'm thinking perhaps the daughters did this one. All of us who looked at these two quilts together thought the same people probably did them because they had such similar quilting, but it also could have been that since Grisella surely trained both of her daughters, that their styles of quilting would have looked very much the same. There is an odd end to this story in that by the 1880 census, Grisella is listed as head of household without Michael. And in 1890, the special schedule of surviving veterans and their widows lists her as a widow. However, Michael took off at some point in the 1870s or 80s for Arkansas, where he married and had 2 children. So I don't know if Grisella just pretended that she was a widow or couldn't because of the social embarrassment, or whether he just took off and we don't know what happened. But there it is. The census reveals all. So what do we think?
Well, I think I probably mentioned this before, but there was a term for people like Grisella, a grass widow. Have you ever heard that? My mother used that, and I didn't know what it meant, but I think it means a woman who's been abandoned. But why grass? But anyway, lots, we don't know much about post-Civil War life and all those soldiers with all that post-traumatic stress syndrome,
Yeah.
Or a lot of them never really recovered emotionally. And some of them were, well, I mean, she had a baby by another guy. Let's get the marriage counselor in here to see if we can work it out. But
Debby, was that a Union headstone there that he's buried under?
Yes, I think it was. So yeah, even though he's in Arkansas, it's acknowledged at that point.
He's not hiding himself.
Right. Oh no, not at all.
So
without the census, I don't know if he ever would have been found.
As for the first baby with another guy, Darkly, I think we have to consider that maybe it wasn't her choice.
oh,
Possible.
well, that's true, right?
Possible.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
let's get back to quilts, although we do love personal gossip.
Well, I was wondering, Debbie, if you could, for the people who don't know, talk a little bit about Mary Simon. You've referred to her blocks a few times, and some people won't know who she is. If you can say something about her.
Oh, all right. The probably the premier Baltimore album quilt designer, German immigrant. Her designs are just massed florals, just fabulous numbers of blossoms all together in very classic spreading style. She made them up as kits, and they were sold all over inner city Baltimore, where they were just made into fabulously constructed masterpieces, and they were sold as blocks. She probably did whole tops kitted up and ready to go, or she made these kits and they were sold in other places, and they do show up in Virginia, and here's one in York County right over the border from there. So they, of course, people came to Baltimore and bought them, and they ended up other places, but they're very distinctive. They're all made within a short time period of very similar fabrics, and sometimes the same fabrics from quilt to quilt. So that is where the style really gets its name. And as Jennifer Goldsboro has said, while the album quilt fad may have started in Pennsylvania and shares a lot with Baltimore, the Baltimore style is just the most elaborate. And she sort of attributes that to the needlework skills of Maryland women, and especially their fondness for chintz, which she thinks is what they were copying when they were making these very elaborate floral baskets and wreaths.
Well, when she is listed as seamstress, what year was that in the census?
1860.
Could she have been making blocks and selling them as kits?
Possibly. Very possibly.
We
And
rarely think of that, but it's so logical, because how did so many people get up to speed on doing that beautiful applique?
And each one is, wait till you see my
We will.
my
We
segment.
need to move on.
It's incredible how it touches this. But I mean, look at the detail in each one of those. In hers, that's a sampler, right? It was a sampler.
Yep.
Imagine her hanging that in her shop and somebody coming and say, I want that one. And she could, send it.
Well, she did live on a farm. I know that for sure in 1860. And it was right next to her mother and brother. And they were all given land. There are a lot of other lead farms in the area. So even though she lived there, that certainly could have done that. I forgot to mention that she lived in 1860. Then on the next census page is another Ebaugh, and she's also a seamstress. So there might have been some back and forth there. And her daughter, Mary Amanda, marries an Ebaugh in the 1880s. So no, a little later than that. And I haven't done the Ebaugh genealogy, but I'm sure that they were connected. So there was a lot of sewing going on just in this small town. I mean, York, which is just a few miles north and much more prosperous and larger city, probably had way more people doing album quilts at the time.
Debbie, have you compared the size of the similar blocks? I mean, yeah.
Just kind of visually, they seem to be 15 or 16 inches in size, and that pretty much is what they were in Carroll County and in Baltimore too. So very similar sizes.
So, and what would what about comparing the size of the actual applique on the block? That would kind of suggest that there a lot of them were made by
People had a template.
Yeah, it is. I think if you could compare them side by side, I think you would probably find a lot of similarities and overlaps there. And I'm kind of out of time from my side.
You are you're the timekeeper. Yeah, we'll have to move on.
No, we have to move on.
That's pretty fascinating. You had a lot to show us there.
Hey, Barbara, I want to suggest that we change the order a little bit and go to Mary Kay, since she has something very similar. Can we do that?
All right. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Well, let's have Mary Kay talk next. Mary Kay Walvogel is another independent researcher, and her specialty is not only regional, she lives in Tennessee, but also time-wise, she's very interested in the 20th century. And so we're going to hear about some 20th century quilt history. Go on, Mary Kay.
Okay. Well, remember in episode 19, we were all at the AQSG seminar in San Diego, and we were in the vendors hall, each of us looking at quilts that the vendors suggested. Do you all remember that?
Yep.
Yep. So that night I was in the elevator with Lori Stubbs, and she said, another great AQSG person who loves really old quilts. And she said, she had a quilt that she didn't get into the show and tell, and would I like to come look at it in her hotel room? And the other two people in the elevator said, we want to come too. This is the fun about AQSG, is some of the incredible quilts you see behind the scenes. And this is one. Now, in light of what we just looked at with Debbie Cooney's, I mean, okay, and Lori brought it to you. I remember, I think all of you got to see this quilt in the vendor's hall too, but the blocks are 15 inches square. It's a sampler. There are a lot of quilts or a lot of applique blocks on here that look like ones we just saw in some of those York County quilts. The wreath of roses, well, especially the one in the bottom left over here, the oak leaf and reel. It looks so familiar, but as Lori says, it's made of satin. I mean, what a strange thing to see a quilt like this in multicolors. And it's the story. So the story goes, she lives in Colorado, of course, and she's very close to the Rocky Mountain Quilt Museum. And this quilt was being deaccessioned, may not have even been accessioned, but the curator, put it aside and said, Lori, there's a name on this quilt. You might want to check it out before, whatever the fate may be. So here is Lori showing us the information that they have on the quilt, talking with Sarah Farley. And I mean, we are just like dumbfounded. I mean, we've been quilt historians for a long time. We could see with our eyes, we could see what it is, but really, what is it? In the corner on the back is this label that says, handmade by Marie Parks, 1964. I was a junior in high school in 1964, and I'm not sure we ever really look at quilts that were made in the 60s. Again, we're looking at this. I'm taking pictures of every block. I'm just kind of fascinated with it. The colors are bright like the 60s, but again, it's satin. I'm not sure that's what was going on then in quilts. So, as I said, Lori went ahead and did some research on Marie Parks and found this woman who's a very strong possibility. But Marie Parks is a pretty common name. And here's an obituary, 2012. She has died at the age of 102 in Lincoln, Illinois. And it says she was an avid reader and loved to sew quilts. This is all we have right now. And they've actually reached out to the grandson, but they've shown, and Lori has been in touch and showed him the pictures of these. He didn't recognize the quilt. And he said, my grandmother never put little labels like that on it. So really at the seminar, I thought, well, maybe that would be a clue to find out where those labels came from, but it wasn't a very strong clue. But let's get back to the quilt itself. Everything looks pretty normal until you get to this little block on the right. And Lori said, as her description was, I didn't see what was going on here, but she said, it looks like a crib. And this little blue bird is floating over the baby's crib. And see that brown thing on there? She thought it was some kind of label. Well, lo and behold, after I got back from the seminar, Susan Miller is actually the one, she's been on our know-it-alls. Susan Miller is actually the one who said, look in the Marguerite Ickes book. And I did. I pulled the book off my shelf. Now, this is not a book that I usually go to at all, but I know Marguerite. But here was this very block, the line drawing, and she calls it Pennsylvania Dutch. And we ought to talk about that at the end of this whole segment too, because what does what do we call York County quilts in the 50s and 60s? Often it ends up being something like Pennsylvania Dutch, but I'm not sure there's any of that going on here. And I think maybe Marguerite designed this block, but the other ones, so here is her book, her famous book on the upper left. I own this dust jacket, but not the book. I do own the green book in the center, and most of you own the book on the right. This book on the upper left was put out by Greystone Press in New York. And here's the author, Marguerite Ickes. She's living in New York in the 1940s, working for the WPA. But in 1959, the book is republished by Dover Publishing, and their flyer, it's interesting what they had to say. It has been out of print for many years and has brought up to $15 on the antique market on the rare occasions when it could be found. And I wonder if any of us have seen this. I've never seen the original book. I've only really seen the one in the center, and I'm beginning to think that is unusual, but the one on the right is still in print. It's still available from Dover Press. Marguerite Ickes was inducted into the Quilters Hall of Fame in the first group in 1980. In 1979, in Quilters Journal, Joyce Gross, and I think it was Sally Garut who actually had visited Marguerite and spoke of her. And Sally writes that she contacted Rita Rice, the crafts editor at Dover Publishing, and Rita reports that the book had been among their top selling books, not just for a few months, but for 19 years. It is still being published, especially in federal places like the national park systems. In their bookstores, this is the book, the quilt book that they just keep buying over and over and over again. I guess I was a little put out by this. I thought there wasn't, and I think I didn't feel like it went into much depth. So I had kind of overlooked this book. It didn't come off my shelf very often. And I know a little bit about Marguerite because I've written some about the honorees, and she seems like a really interesting person. But anyway, I bet I've never gone to this book for anything like quilt patterns, but every single one of those, there are 30 blocks on this, and every one except 5 are in Marguerite Ickes's book. And whoever made this quilt followed the pattern exactly. Tulip design, the lobster quilt, oak leaves. That oak leaf one is kind of neat because it has some, and Marguerite recommended that you do some that have some kind of surface, like velvets or flannels. And each one of those little acorn caps are kind of flannel-like. The one on the upper right is not in the Ickes book, and I was looking for it in other places, found it in Barbara's Encyclopedia. It has 8 plumes, and it's in clear stone, which is from the 1920s. So, well, where was Marguerite getting these blocks? But most of them you could see, and here's the coxcomb on the bottom left. That looks so much like one that was in the York County quilts. And then prairie flower shows up a lot on quilts from the 1850s, especially in Indiana, Western Pennsylvania. There's the one I was speaking about before. And the bridal wreath is on page 118. And of course, she has hearts, and she mentions, kind of perpetuates some of those myths about bridal quilts and hearts. Triple flower is on the melon patch on the bottom left. Interestingly, I looked in Brackman. Barbara, you could speak to this. I found only 3 that are in Brackman. I might be wrong. And they were in the applique book. Melon patch, the one on the left, the Pennsylvania quilt Dutch design, which is a little bird one. No, and then pineapple applique. Here's Pineapple Design in the upper left and it's in Marguerite's book, and then Barbara had it indexed in her applique book. And then the bottom right one, Pennsylvania Dutch Design, is in Barbara's book. The one in the upper right is called North Carolina Lily. And in the book, she has a full page of the quilt itself. And look how the one little lily kind of droops. And that's how it was in the original pattern. She talks about designing that little block. And so there are instances where Marguerite says that she made quilts, knew how to make quilts, but really preferred to collect or write about them. A lot like you'll hear me say, I do know how to do them and I do like to do them, but there are other things that kind of fascinate me. But nevertheless, I think that's a really cute North Carolina lily pattern. Now, the one on the bottom left, as I said, there were like only five of the 30 blocks were not in the book, Marguerite Dickers's book. So the quilter obviously went to Marguerite's book to get these blocks, but the one in the bottom left did not come from Marguerite's book. It's called Seth Thomas Rose, and it was published in the Kansas City Star in October 1929. Barbara has blogged about this. Maybe we could talk about it because it's a great story of kind of a romanticized Midwestern quilt history and where this name Seth Rose comes from. But here again is the quilt. We wonder about it. The block, I don't think, again, back to what you got in the book. And it says right in the middle on this article when it first came out in 1949, it's a practical quilting handbook, which gives not only over 100 regional designs, it's a history of quilt making. It serves as a guide for collecting and has a chapter on novel uses of quilting, applique, etc. The directions for each quilt gives material needed, like you see on the right, the colors for each unit needed, and line drawings, and the line drawings of the pattern, and a picture of an actual quilt block, or in this case, it's just a block, but it's made up in fabric. So here's Marguerite, and she was born in 1896 in Ohio, lived on a farm. Both her grandmother and mother quilted. She, like I said, learned how to quilt, but was not that interested in it. She attended and graduated from Ohio University in Ohio. She went to New York and graduated in 1929 with an MA from Cornell, and then finds herself in New York City, in Manhattan, without a job in the Depression. She worked for the WPA. She ended up being involved in recreation aspects. She was once director of the Girl Scouts. And in 1979, Joyce Gross writes about her in the Quilt Journal. And the very next year, she shows up as a member of the first group of inductees in the Quilters Hall of Fame. What you see here is a kind of a window at the library in Dennis, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. That's where she's buried, in Dennis, and she ended up living there. And they have a little vitrine in honor of her. That is her Quilters Hall of Fame pewter box there on the left, her name tag and her book. And see, she had the third, or at least the library had this third version. And the Quilters Hall of Fame, when they write about her, it's this quilt on the left that they say she made, or according to Hollis Turnbull, who knew her, said that she made. And according to him, she made this quilt using fabrics left over from a theater production group a WPA theater group in New York. Interestingly, it's satin, it's velvets, and it's very nicely quilted. I'm wondering if this Marie Parks might have known her, or I don't know. Anyway, there we are. So what to do with this lovely quilt? I think as Lori, I spoke to her this week and she said, remember, I am just holding it. I'm the custodian right now. And she really does hope that maybe it would go to the Quilters Hall of Fame collection in honor of Marguerite. And in a way it does in showcase the kinds of blocks that she created in that book. So what do you think? I think she's using a lot of the books. I didn't say this. A lot of the quilts come from the Index of American Design. They come from Woman's Day, which was also in the 40s, which was also using Index of American Design quilts. So when she was writing her book, I think she was using antique quilts, maybe not ones that she owned herself, but were in museums or were published. And then she did the line drawings and wrote the instructions so that a person could make a quilt out of those blocks. And I think she was thinking multiple blocks, but in this case, the quilt maker did a sampler.
Mary Kay, do I remember correctly that the directions for most of these blocks don't work out?
They do. Oh, don't work out. Well, I don't know. They did for this woman. Or whoever made this quilt.
Does anybody else remember that? I think I recall that people have said that the directions and sizes and proportions and whatever are not exact, which would go along with your idea that she wasn't really a quilt maker.
Right.
It's just fascinating. You don't see that many samplers made in rayon. I assume it's rayon. Might have been silk satin. And that's what's so interesting. And then here we have two satin quilts. You know, very interesting.
Two satin quilts? What do you mean two?
The black one that Hollis.
Oh, yes. Yes. I thought you were talking about the one behind me. But...
No, there's a set but that's much more typical in the 1880s than it was in 1940. So Mary Kay, I don't know. You know, it's certainly provocative. Maybe that woman was making quilts to Marguerite's instructions.
You know, when I opened my first store in 1972 here in Marin, in California, we wanted to get all the books we could find to sell on a bookshelf, and there were almost none in 1972. And Marguerite Ickes's book was one of them. And it wasn't very long after that reading it, it became clear that she was relying on myth, and also wasn't she quoting Aunt
Jane?
Aunt Jane, who's a fictional character. And so it isn't particularly strong in the scholarly department. And so we stopped carrying it after a couple of years just because we thought, and I did hear at that time that the patterns didn't work for people who were really trying to use them. So we just eliminated it. And like you, Mary Kay, I don't think I've cracked that book in 40 years. It doesn't have much in it of interest to me. So, yeah.
Well, being a lifelong Girl Scout, that's what really intrigued me about her. And I admit, when I saw it in Quilter's Journal, I thought, wow, I want to know a little bit more about her. She looks like a tough woman. She had a tough life. She was I think she would be maybe an interesting person to take a second look at. I did do quite a bit of newspaper.com research on her. There's a really funny picture. I didn't know if I should put it in, but anyway, she was a chain smoker, And there she was. There's one in the Boston Globe where she's on Cape Cod, and they call her the Grandma Moses of Cape Cod. And she's now drawing these little pictures. And that's what she became famous for in Cape Cod,
Oh,
the chain smoking Grandma Moses. And she did.
And she wasn't a grandma. She never married, did she?
That right. That's right. But anyway, she just seems like kind of a fun woman. And I've already put a couple people onto her who really like getting.
what do the paintings look like? Do you know?
We could look back. I do.
No, we don't have time, dear. Why don't you put them?
I don't imagine they're just little things about little people.
Right. If she was called Grandma Moses, they probably were pictorial, folky pictorial things.
Right.
Be
We'll
interesting.
post them on our Know-It-Alls Facebook page.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah, and we'll do some backup here too on some of the things that we've alluded to that we can go back and post there, because that's a good place to look at things we don't have right here, right now. But we have to move on, and it's Julie's turn. There she is. And as she said, she had a store in California very early in the revival of the 70s. And she is one of America's leading dealers. And we love having her around because she knows that market.
Yes. Okay. Here's a quilt that I found and purchased about 12 or 14 years ago. I've bought it from someone in Pennsylvania who said it had been made in Pennsylvania, even though it has these images that suggest another part of the country. So as it turns out, when I saw it, I thought about another quilt. But before we look at that other quilt, I want to show you some details of this. As you can see, these are little scenes that appear to have a Western theme, and they are set within circles, which is quite an unusual way to make a quilt. Let's just look at some of the details here. Almost every block, probably every block, has some reference to the southwestern part of the US. I kind of love that little cactus block. I like how she used her fabric, and I like how she used the color at the top of the pieces on the left. Unknown maker, but said to be clearly from Pennsylvania. Why? Why would somebody in Pennsylvania be making this kind of quilt? Including Native Americans. These are two different blocks, as you can see, and it's pretty simple, simplified. One might even say, elementary in her way of making figures and images, but you get the idea of what she's up to. Now, it reminded me of this quilt, which had already been discovered by then. And as you can see, is lots of images and scenes within circles. And the maker was a woman named Goldie Richmond, who signed her quilt. And let me always take the opportunity to encourage you out there who are making quilts to please give us as much information and label your quilts as you can, because thank goodness Goldie M. Richmond made this quilt she called Arizona Portholes, designed and made in 1956, and Desert Views and Papago at Play sells Arizona. Well, who is she? And what was she up to? Here she is on the right, and here she is with one of her quilts on the left. She was born Goldie Preston in Kansas in 1896. She grew up in poverty and was an extremely large woman. She was 6'4" and said to have weighed over 300 pounds. You can see her here on the left with her first husband, whom she married when she was 31 years old in 1927. Now, She grew up in poverty, and it's said that she was very horribly bullied and harassed when she was young for her size. And she became large very young and got even larger. Much harassed, she was apparently taught by her mother to ignore it all and get on with life. And so she graduated from school at age 11 and went right to work. She married this guy whose name was Marion Tracy. She was 31 and he was 68. And in fact, he was already sickly. So she was married to him for a few years and he died and she married someone else. But in the meantime, they had operated Tracy's Trading Post, which was on the Tohono O'odham Reservation. Now, it was located in San Simon, 110 miles west of Tucson, on the Tohono O'odham Reservation. Now, the Tohono O'odham were known for a very long time, formerly as the Papago or Papago. Maybe one of you knows the correct pronunciation of it. But at the time that she was running this trading post, which she continued after her husband's death for many years, they were known as the Papago, and her quilts refer to those Native Americans as the Papago, where they are now known as the Tohono O'odham. And here I wanted to show you where this was. You can see Tucson in the middle there, and the Tohono O'odham Reservation is huge, absolutely huge. And because of certain political lines and so on, some of it is actually in Mexico, but most of it is in Arizona. Within the Tohono Reservation, there are small portions of it that are another tribe, but mainly it is the Papago, and that is where the trading post was located. So on the right, we have one of her most famous quilts, Papago Indian Activities quilt, made by her in San Simon, Arizona, 1966. Luckily for us, it's now in the collection of the Arizona State Museum. She was a great friend to the Native Americans who lived around her. And what she was doing in her quilts was depicting in a masterful way life around her with an obvious great admiration, respect, and love for the Native Americans around her. In fact, she promoted the sale of their kind of famous baskets. She assisted them through the years in any way that she could. And she sold those baskets. She also sold her quilts. And apparently she made quite a few of them, even though they are very detailed and each take many hours to make. Let's see if we can see some details here. Again, she was 6'4", weighed over 300 pounds. And there's a story that she once killed a bobcat with her bare hands. And Lord knows if that's a true story. After all, Davy Crockett might have killed a bar, or maybe not. But as someone wrote, Goldie Tracy Richmond handled the needle and thread with equal aplomb. So let's look at some of the details of what she did here. These guys are playing what she called ginskut or ginskut. I don't know what that is. I looked it up. I tried to figure out what it was, but it is a Native American game that's played among that particular group. The detail and the way she uses fabric here is just amazing. And what we're going to do here is look at a bunch of details of some of her quilts. Let me go back just for a second here, or forward. And you can see the wonderful way that she chooses her prints and composes each scene. I just love how she saw fabric and what she did with it. Just look at that. It's just wonderful. You can see that at the bottom of her blocks, in this quilt at least, she embroiders what she is depicting. And here I bring in the corn. These little labels down here refer to the quilt at the museum, and they're telling us what row in which they each block lives. Watching the rodeo, look at the detail on this thing. Wonderful compositions and just such spirit and joie de vivre in all of this. Here we see the Great Seal of the Papago tribe that she created in 1937. And she clearly had a great amount of respect and love for these people and the tribe itself. The tribal flag on the left here, and then you can see on the right, that is their tribal flag, and you can see it again here. And then finally, she writes, this emblem floats atop the tribal building with the stars and stripes at rodeo time. Okay, let's compare what Goldie did to what's happening in my quilt, because I think it will become obvious what my theory is here. And but let's just compare what we see on my Western quilt, collected and made in Pennsylvania, with Goldie's images. You can see how Goldie did her cactuses, and most prominent, I guess, that I should say, is that the Western quilt, the one made in Pennsylvania, is set in portholes, just like Goldie's. So let's compare Goldie's masterful depiction of a bucking bronco with the one that I have. Here she cut out the guy being thrown off the horse, and here Goldie did hers on the left. So on the right, we're looking at Goldie's depiction of the Native Americans, and on the right, and then on the left is the very simplified kind of stereotypic images of Native Americans on the left. Now, what happened? All right. Mrs. Goldie Richmond of Sells, Arizona, made a quilt which she named Papagoria, Papago Indian Land, and the quilt won first prize and a sweepstakes award in 1954 at the Arizona State Fair. So here they're saying how many blocks there are, circular pictures of original design lined with yellow percale. Other pictures represent Mariposa lily, prickly pear, ocotillo, palo verde tree. Mrs. Richmond spent 3 months making this quilt, sometimes sewing 16 hours a day, and it was purchased by this woman's husband. Not for sale, but purchased by him. Now, what's going on the right? This is Carolyn Obegi Davis, who is the person who has done the most work on Goldie Richmond and has written a book, which I will put in the bibliography for this. And you can see the quilt that she's standing in front of, which is the only one of Goldie's I have seen that's done with a yellow set. And check out the brown squares that this one is called Saguaro Harvest. Let's go here. Let's go here and look at them together. Oh, geez, Julie. All right, we're looking at them together. So Carolyn is standing in front of Goldie's quilt. The quilt on the left is the one that I purchased. And what could possibly have happened? I think that it's pretty obvious, though we don't know for sure. I can't imagine that the woman on the left, the woman who made the quilt on the left, traveled through Arizona, stopped at the trading post, which was a popular destination for people. And here's Goldie selling quilts and baskets and all kinds of other things. And the person who made the quilt on the left saw the quilt on the right, went home and did the best she could as a non-master in recreating her version of what she saw with Goldie's quilt. I can't imagine any other explanation, but I'd be happy to hear what you all have to say. And just before I do that, I do want to say this. It put me in mind of other masterful quilt makers who created quilts of scenes of life around them. And in particular, one of the great folk art quilts of all time, now at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts and once in the Esprit quilt collection when I was curator there. And this is Mrs. White's folk art quilt, which is now called Scenes of American Life. Mrs. White lived in Hartford, Connecticut. This is not related in any way to the quilts I featured today, except in the sense that Mrs. White depicted all these scenes around her. Oh, look at this. There's a bucking bronco. Can you believe that? How funny. I'd have never even thought of that. Bucking bronco block in Mrs. White's quilt. And I show it only because Mrs. White, another masterful maker of quilts, created this fantastic quilts around her, scenes around her, as did Goldie. So let's stop sharing and see what you guys think.
I think you're right. I do.
I can't think of another explanation. Can you?
No.
Well, maybe, wait a minute. Maybe your quilt was made first and Goldie said, I can make better job of it. But I doubt it. I doubt it.
Well, it would mean that somebody who lived in Pennsylvania would have thought of all those things
I know.
all by herself.
It was the media at the time.
I did.
Well, that's
I
pretty
did
wonderful.
post this. I did post this on Facebook, I think, some time ago. And Carolyn Obegi Davis was so intrigued. She saw it, was so intrigued that she asked me to send it to her, thinking that could it possibly be Goldie's first try, and that doesn't even seem vaguely possible. But I did send it to her, and it was lovely to get her ideas, which were similar to what we're talking about here.
Well, maybe as a visitor, that woman or someone she knew had a Brownie camera and took, a little black and white snapshot of it to kind of remind them.
Yeah. I'm going to lean over here because I'm in my shop now, and I put that quilt, which I still own, on the rack behind me. And I think you can see the gun, the boot, the jackrabbit, the cactus.
And don't forget the sashing, that yellow sashing with the dark square. Same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you've psyched it out there.
Well, it wasn't the most difficult mystery we've ever had, but I just think it's fascinating. And Goldie apparently made many, many, many quilts, only 12 of which are now known, but she sold them. And if they took that long, she was really something. She was really something. I would have loved to have known her.
I know it. Can you imagine going into that trading post, finding the 6'3" woman there and you're surrounded by quilts and all these wonderful baskets? Yeah. I think it's pronounced papago, but that's what I've always heard.
Papago.
But I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty. I used to go to Trading Post, in the 70s, and it would have just been wonderful. Wonderful.
Weren't you interested in cowboy boots at that time?
Well, I had a cowboy.
Yeah.
I want to be. Anyway, so we saw a lot of stuff, but I bought a lot of rugs and, lots and lots of stuff. It was wonderful.
It puts me in mind, just to finish up here, it puts me, when I read about how bullied and harassed she was when she was a child, and how her mother suggested she put it aside and move on. And then she became this person who clearly identified with the underdog, being the Native Americans, who too were harassed and degraded in thery own ways. And she apparently was a really great friend to them and clearly loved them and admired them, which really comes through in these beautiful, beautiful quilts.
The detail I remember from Carolyn's talk that was so sad was that she'd had that trading post for like, what, 30 years at least. And when she retired and she had to move off the reservation, she was not allowed by law to stay there anymore because she was not Native American. So that was sad.
She was buried in Mesa. I know that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we have to move on
Yes.
because we're going to run out of time here. And our friend Alden is not with us today. I have to say she has a new knee. And I said, you can do nothing. And she said, what do you mean do nothing? I have to get up every hour and walk around. So she's suffering from physical therapy right now as we speak, but we're missing her. And I'm going to talk about a quilt, something we've talked about before. Julie, several months ago, talked about a quilt that really solved a question for us. There's a lot of discussion of temperance quilts. I have to find my screen here, kids. And we're going to go down. Anyway, a couple of months ago, Julie in episode 7, there's my vacuum cleaners cleaning my house today. In the episode, we were talking about deacons, daughters, and drunks, which you can watch anytime if you don't already have it. She talked about the wonderful thing about this quilt that she found in fairly recently, and that many people who study temperance quilts and look at temperance quilts are kind of confounded by the fact that you don't really see references to the tons of temperance literature to these quilt patterns that we assume to be indicative of people's feelings about whether or not wine and whiskey are good for you or a societal curse. But we don't find references to the symbolism in the patterns as referring to temperance. And I think this is one of the few which was published. The pattern was published in 1934 in the Kansas City Star, called the Water Glass, I believe. And someone made a quilt with that name on there, and then the words WCTU, and it's the Women's Christians Temperance Union, which we are all very familiar with because they really did have a public relations presence in the United States up to Prohibition, and then somewhat after Prohibition was terminated. They still were very active in the middle of the 20th century. So I think we have here the kind of smoking gun that someone thought that this particular pattern did reflect temperance sentiment. So there are many, many examples of these water glasses, but we can trace them to published patterns. They don't seem to be something that was in the folklore before 1900. And I base that on all the examples, and I've got quite a few examples of this, examples of the quilts and the fabrics in them, and then the patterns, which are dated, and it was quite popular in the Kansas City Star under various names. And then Mary Kay's husband's family has this photograph of a bunch of kids in Mississippi sitting in front of a temperance quilt. So things, it's a common pattern, but I'm going to go back, but it tends to be 20th century American. And I would say you would not see it, I'm going out on a limb, before 1907, when the American Woman, a fairly well circulating newspaper, showed a picture of it as a tumbler, which is a glass with a foot. That's what I assume a tumbler is, although there are unfooted tumblers too. So the reason, can you see that? I hope you can. What I was found, which so surprised me, is I put this up on our Quilt History South page, put up some of the tumbler patterns just to see if it was a Southern pattern or we can find it in the North. And people referred to it as a chalice. Now, that's because they're trying to read the mind of the maker by what the associations mean to them. They're not historians. They're reacting to their own environment, which is, of course, what we do. And historians have to train themselves to go, no, that might be what I think it means, but what did it mean in 1907? So we're going to talk about this particular quilt. And the reason we're talking about it is someone in Texas, someone has decided that the quilt, which is in the American Museum, a museum for American objects in Bath, in Britain, they need to send it back because it was stolen. And it's obvious to this man that this is one of those Underground Railroad quilts that has some code to it. Well, we all know about the Underground Railroad. We've talked about it and talked about it. We cannot change minds, but we can't offer alternative, accurate history. So I've been working on this particular quilt because I just get so frosted that people misinterpret things. And also, I was surprised to see how many of people who love quilts today thought of it as a chalice. Now, I am not an Episcopalian or an Anglican, and in my church, we never had footed goblets at communion. But many, many people seem to have the idea that it reflects this Anglican communion. I looked it up on newspapers.com, Mary Kay, and I think that's the best money we spend every month is that. But I found 20 references just in sort of cursory looking to a chalice quilt, but they were all after 1991, which is when this red and white quilt was in the collection of the American Museum in Bath, and they started publicizing it. Chalice quilt is pretty far-fetched to me. So as I say, no more mind reading. Let's try to look at the context of the time. Although those are some cute know-it-alls and our guru. So to us, when you talk about a glass full of red, I think recreational drinking, as I love to have a glass of wine before dinner. But to many people, who are raised in Episcopalian churches in America, they see it as sacramental wine. I think we have completely forgotten that this did not mean a glass of wine. It meant a glass of water. And it's over on the left, we have some sheet music from 1873 in which we get the same depiction of a water glass, and the man is holding his temperance pledge. So I can go on and on about water and how influential that image was in late 19th century, early 20th century culture. It goes back at least until the 1830s when the Coldwater Army was formed. This was an early temperance group that kind of fell out of favor after the Civil War. It was mainly for kids. You got a boy when he was young and convinced him that alcohol was bad, and you raised him for life and he would be sober, you would hope. Of course, we know now it's a disease and not a choice for many people. But those buttons were collectible. Little kids loved to collect things, and the Coldwater Army buttons there was a variety of them, and children collected them. So think about the Coldwater Army when you think about that glass. Now, later incarnation was the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and that was founded in the 1870s. And it's different because there was a societal change. Before 1870, and I'm going to go, this is one of Julie's quilts on the bottom. I'll probably come back to this one. But before the 1870s and 80s, you were crazy to drink water. It would kill you if it had cholera in it. And certainly it would irritate your digestive system. And people had constant problems with drinking public water or drinking water that they found. And over on the left here at the top, this is the public pump. That's where people got their water. And it wasn't until, say, the 50s that scientists started figuring out that people who drank out of that public pump got cholera and died. And they eliminated the public pump. Now, of course, your alternative, you had to drink something. So people drank a lot of whiskey and beer. And that's one reason the consumption of alcohol was so high. Although it might not have been a Christian thing to do, it was a practical thing to do. So many babies were raised just drinking alcohol because it was safe. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, though, formed after public water got better. And of course, once people realized people were dying from the public water systems, they improved the public water systems. And so one by one, cities around the world would develop a public water system. Now, the Women Christian Temperance Union, I think, not coincidentally, started pushing the idea of drinking cold water when it was a practical alternative. And they always used water as one of their symbols. Now, here on the bottom left, that's a parade in the 20th century. We are for prohibition, which was a new name for temperance. And she's on a water wagon. Now, you may have heard someone say, he's been on the water wagon for 3 weeks. So water wagon was one of the symbols that they used. But the other symbol that was so important that we've forgotten about is the public fountain. They decided that as one of their charities, they would, and also it helped with their message, they would put public water fountains in cities around the country. And so if you poke around in your own town, sometimes they're not where they were originally, although the one in Hanford is, they're in museums. And this one on the bottom right here is says WCTU up here, is in a museum now. It's been moved, but it was on the public street. And my favorite thing about that picture is the dog butt, always, but the dogs, it had a place at the bottom that dogs could have. So this was, a bubbler. You can see up here, this is sort of the metal parts. So they put these in cities all over the country. So when you think about that tumbler and you think about water, I mean, it's completely different because we take water so for granted in this country. Here again, we have one of those very isolated references to where an actual quilt pattern and temperance are linked. And this is in Oklahoma. I found a couple of references in Oklahoma in the mid-30s to making what is it called, water glass quilt to show off at a WCTU meeting. And so in this town of Alva, they made one, and then they were going to take it to Tulsa to the statewide conference. So that's very similar to Julie's quilt in that we see this tumbler, this wine glass or footed glass as a symbol that they understood very well. Now we'll go back to the one at the American Museum in Britain. Unfortunately, this was given in the 60s, no, maybe the 80s, excuse me, 80s by a family who were, the husband was from Texas, the wife was from Louisiana. They lived in Carmel, California at the time. They had lived in England during the war, World War II. And for some reason, the woman from Carmel decided that 2 quilts should go to the American Museum, and they were glad to take it. So here's what the museum has used as their caption for years. Now, I thought maybe the woman who gave it said that the Anglican bishop from New Orleans traveled to Marshall, Texas, which is where her husband's family lived, and he would perform baptisms and marriages. Now, we look at this, and the woman who's a curator at the American Museum, Kate Hebert, sent me wonderful pictures. This is the quilt in question. This is the backing brought up as binding. And this that you can see, this candy stripe, is the back. There is no way that quilt was made in 1860 by the fabrics. I mean, the candy stripe. Have you ever seen that in a quilt that was 19th century? You have?
No, 20th century.
Yeah, they're 20th. It's a 20th century backing. It's 20th century quilting, maybe after 1880. The pattern is after 1907. So I could go on, and I've looked at lots of things for Kate. She's not given it back. The guy even wrote to King Charles. So I'm going to have an open letter to King Charles. Says he wants that quilt back. But here I looked in the quilt index, 14 results for goblet, which is another name for it. And this one says it's 1850-75. But if you look at it closely, it's made up of a bunch of very blue indigo prints that are very typical of after 1890. It's not just one print. So all these tend to be 20th century. Now, Kate and I both have gone off on a tangent, as people like to do. We like to do anyway. and thought about the Anglican bishop who traveled. How could that happen? How could he come 300 miles from New Orleans? Then Kate went back and looked in the papers, and the family did not call him Anglican. They called him Episcopalian. But the curator at the time, we don't know who it was, someone decided that the English audience would not know what Episcopalian was, and so started calling it Anglican. So that's one reason it seems so dissonant to us that we don't have Anglican bishops traveling around, but we do have Episcopalian bishops traveling around, especially in the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And remember, these people on this farm, because it was well long after the Civil War, probably were Black, and they probably were members of AME. It still thrives. Just last May, the AME bishop came to my town because we have restored this beautiful church through the city and the historic preservation and the church funds. And so when we celebrated opening it, the bishop came to celebrate with us. So then when Kate and I are sort of going down this rabbit hole where we're going to look and see if we can find the actual bishop, mention of his visits in the early 20th century. This man is not it, but he was quite famous. And I mean, he lived in Philadelphia, but he traveled around quite a bit. He died in 1891, so I don't think he was the bishop that came. Now, going back to the donors, which are the downers, the downer donors. Charles, a son of Marguerite, who was the original donor, Kate found this letter. And so he says his grandma made this quilt for him when he was in World War II. And they gave 2 quilts, as I said, this one and the tumbler. Then he talks about, at the last sentence, his grandmother, who died in 1956, was raised at Mimosa Hall, this plantation, and learned to quilt under the same roof as her grandfather's slaves, who made the chalice. Well, that's very, you can associate anything you want with that, because it's the same roof, the house. It's not that she learned to quilt from slaves, and I think people have misinterpreted it. So we're not giving it back, is my statement to King Charles. And I think that we know quite a bit about it. And I always feel that it's more important to find the source of the quilt in the media and the public attention at the time, rather than try to read the mind of the maker with your own associations. So I'm going to stop and see what you guys think. You think I'm crazy?
Well,
No, absolutely right.
the curator, just to, here we are on Quilters Hall of Fame honorees, whatever. I wish Questa Benberry was here, because I bet she knows the story.
Oh, she did.
The Sheila Betterton was inducted in Quilters Hall of Fame, died the next year. But she accepted that quilt in 1980. And on the page in the book, in the Quilters Hall of Fame book, there it is. They chose, the museum at Bath chose to offer to the Quilters Hall of Fame book. So, and with the very same story that you just gave. So
in terms of shortening things, I left out all my cute pictures of Sheila Betterton.
right.
And but I think it was probably Sheila who changed the word from Episcopalian to Anglican. I think she should have used parentheses, but there were other people working there too, at the time. So I can't just pinpoint Sheila as the person who changed it. Kate has a letter from Questa Benberry in the files, and someone echoing me many years ago, or who I'm echoing, said they thought it was not made during the Civil War. It was not, that old. And Questa wrote back that she wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe it. And she said, well, even though the pattern was published in 1907, sometimes those patterns echoed what was out in the public before that. They just recorded what was in the vernacular. But I think in this case, it's more the pattern really did influence the quilts rather than the pattern captured what was already out there. So it's a lot. I'll send that letter to you, Mary Kay.
Oh, yeah, that'd be
It's always nice to read, because Quest is my audience. No, I don't write a blog without.
always
thinking,
here.
what would
But,
Quest?
you know, she did that a lot. I mean, it's hard to get rid of stories that, and she, you know, it was hard to argue with her. But I could tell why, in certain cases, why she was hedging things. But I think that published block is
Can you guys take just a second and explain to our audience who may not know who Questa was? Who she
Questa was our foster mother. Mary Kay and I both had mothers died when we were kids. And so, you know, you pick a foster mother. We picked very well in Questa. She was a quilt historian. We met her through the mail. You know, she wrote for magazines, and we became good friends. And we spent one time for a week or two every year at a retreat with her. And she was Black. I forgot to mention that she was a librarian in St. Louis. So she looked at things in categoric fashion. And she was novel. I remember when she wrote to me when I first started writing to her and sent her something I'd done, she said, "You have got to learn to not just echo secondary sources, my dear." So we did adore her. We did adore her. She probably died 10 years ago. But as Mary Kay, she's always on our shoulders and critiquing.
And has written an important book called Always There.
Yes, African American quilts. Several books. And she was just, you know, she was a real charismatic person, shall we say. And
her mind was a library. I mean, you could ask her almost anything about quilt history, and she had something to say about it, and she'd researched it. She wrote long letters. She wrote a lot of the articles in Quilter's Journal by Joyce Gross were written by her, and also some of the early round robin pattern collecting newsletters in the 70s and 80s those articles were written by her. She was a member of AQSG. She was an honoree of
On the board.
Hall of Fame.
On the board.
Say what?
She was
on the board
early on.
On the board of AQSG. She just
was great.
She was great. We did love her. And we did argue.
Yeah, we did argue. The other, you know, what's fun about these going down, you know, following those things up, Barbara, I think that quilt that the World War II quilt that the grandson was made for the grandson, that is a wonderful piece. I don't think that's a pattern. I might be wrong, but I'm going to.
Oh, I don't know. You know, we'll send it to.
It's funny how you find along the way, you know, other interesting.
I'm wondering if the red in the World War II quilt is anything like the red in the goblet quilt.
Yeah, I often say to families, you know, your better quilt is the one you know, this one I think is the more important quilt. That's a really nice design.
And of course, it's V for victory. Let's point that out. I want to go back.
Here we are interpreting.
I know.
Interpreting from our point of view.
But it is.
Wait, are you saying that you don't think that's a V?
Oh, no, I'm just saying you have to go back. You have to verify. Let's say.
Well,
but I mean, the man, Charles, remembered this being made when he was a young man by his grandma in Texas.
During Second World War.
Barbara, can you go back to any of the goblet or chalice quilts? I want to ask you a question from an image.
What?
Anyone will.
I have to figure out why this won't go up. Oh, that's well, we'll go to this one. Here's one, a red and white one that no one would say was 1860. There were many of them made in red.
What I wanted to point out is that upside down, the chalice is a bottle.
Right.
It is. It's a not a bottle so much as a carafe.
A carafe, exactly.
You kept water in.
Yeah.
Or you could keep wine in.
You showed one where the images were both up and down.
Yes.
And you could see it very clearly.
Yes, let me see. There, yeah. Here, this one down here.
Yeah, the blue one. Right. You can see that it looks like a carafe going upside down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we also see that carafe with a wine glass next to it, an applique in the 1860s with embroidery that says, touch not, taste not.
Mm.
I had to cut something. We can't just go on forever.
Oh,
We could.
Yeah, we do. We
yeah.
do.
I think your images of the Cold Water Army and these temperance pictures say what it really is. I
Yeah,
think
what it means.
Yeah, I don't see how after you've seen those, you can imagine that this is a Chalice quilt,
Right.
Yes.
especially made that early.
And,
Yes.
and yeah, and that one that I found that actually has water glass on it,
Mhm.
embroidered on it, makes it pretty clear, doesn't it?
Yes. And then
Yes.
the reference to the Tulsa WCTU conference in the 30s. So, all
And
right.
the Kansas City Star
Oh,
newspaper
yeah,
article,
paper.
water glass. I mean, that's the only place it was called that, I think.
Uh-huh, mhm. The other places were vaguer, goblet, other names. I
Right.
think. And Evelyn Folan, who was an artist rather than a historian of any kind, or probably enjoyed a drink, she just put it out there as a glass and told you to fussy cut it so it looked etched. So anyway, we could go on and on, but I think it's time to stop.
Well, could I
invite
add
you.
something here just
Oh,
briefly?
yes, yes.
I have a correction that I'd like to make to something I said at in our last broadcast from the AQSG seminar. We were discussing a 1930s quilt, a floral quilt in Xenia's booth with a black sateen background. And I said something to the effect of the Amish community was closed. Well, that was an overstatement, I am told by Barbara Garrett, and she's quite right. The Amish did interact with their neighbors. They shopped at the same stores in the Midwest for sure in the 1930s. They used the same patterns that their quilting neighbors used, and they used black backgrounds on their quilts, where along most of the others of that era would have been white backgrounds. So it's certainly possible that the Amish and the non-Amish bought their fabrics even at the same stores.
Definitely,
In
definitely.
those Combs County and places like that.
Yeah.
So I stand corrected.
All right. Corrected by Barb Garrett, and that's correction. Yeah, she knows what she talks about.
Let's just say one more thing.
One more thing, Joe.
Going back to this episode, Mary Kay, you referred to Pennsylvania Dutch.
Pennsylvania Dutch.
And you were going to get back to it. And let's just make it clear that that phrase comes from Pennsylvania Deutsch.
Exactly.
Deutsch meaning in German, German. So these were Pennsylvania Germans, and it got bastardized to Pennsylvania Dutch. And there you go.
Yeah. And speaking of Questa Benberry, she wrote an article about Pennsylvania Dutch references in quilts and in that, and it's basically that era that Marguerite was writing about. I want to go back and read that article. Barbara, was that in the Lazansky books, or I think it,
I don't know. Questa's not here to
Peace
with
by
him.
Mother. We'll have to
Yeah, I
check.
don't know where it is. We'll try and
But
keep
anyway,
reference.
what does Debbie, what do you say when you see that? When you see that in Pennsylvania Dutch, like in the 1950s?
It's
And it's probably a sales tool.
Yeah,
A sales tool.
probably was.
You know, Germans weren't that popular probably in the 1950s, and
Yeah, it's a marketing term, I think.
yes, a marketing term.
And it was kind of a folk style, and thinking back to that little crib with, with the little bird above it, and the fly foots and the
And the woman in a apron and
wooden shoes, maybe, I
Yes,
think
it's got to be rather kitschy, and that's bad because the Pennsylvania German designs were often very sophisticated.
But it was marketing. All right, I am going to say we are glad that you came to watch us, and we do enjoy an audience of each other and you. So keep coming back.
And the second Wednesday of every month, we'll be back with you. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Did you know you can watch our previous episodes on Vimeo? Vimeo.com/quiltdistrict/VOD_pages. Or you can search for the 6 know-it-alls when you go to the main page of Vimeo.com. You can also catch our first 3 episodes, which are free, on our YouTube channel. You can go directly to our YouTube channel, or you can go to youtube.com and search for the 6 know-it-alls. You can also find all the updates and links to previous episodes on quiltdistrict.com. Go to quiltdistrict.com and then the 6 know-it-alls tab, and there you'll find all the upcoming episode information, as well as the background on how the 6 know-it-alls got started and some biography information on all of the know-it-alls. You'll also want to be sure you put your email address in here so that you can get notified of upcoming events straight to your email inbox.
And I'm harping on this because lighting is so important to understanding the seasonal rhythms of quilting in this early period and why it began to change in the 19th century.
But that's not the way we use it, just to stick it in there. And so often you will find some turkey red pieces just put in there for a little flair. Even this one has a little bit of red down there, although that's a wool.
This is one quilt that I wanted to talk about today because we just were able to add it to the collection last year. Yeah, it was on loan for many years from the family. And some of you know the quilt maker Anna Catherine, known as Catherine Hummel Markey Garnhart of Frederick, Maryland. And thanks to my predecessor, Nancy Gibson, we now know of 10 quilts made by Markey Garnhart. And we now own 3.
Yeah. Yes. And that is very interesting that it's made for the wife of a minister. And I have never heard of the ladies sewing group being called a circle of industry. So that's quite interesting. I wonder if it's belongs to that denomination, if there are others that call themselves something similar.
So I just wanted to show how the designs of these bed rugs relate to whole cloth quilt and other types of quilts. So here we have one of the foot bed rugs, and here we have a whole cloth quilt that was made by Olive Curtis Baker in Connecticut. And the stitching of this whole cloth quilt is basically pretty much the same idea as you see in the bed rug.
The thing is, and this goes back to Lynn too with the bed rugs. If we were looking at men's work, if we were looking at ceramics like graffiti plates or painted chests, we wouldn't be thinking of it as a hobby.